April 22nd, 1942. Berlin, Germany. The air is thick with tension as officers hurry through the marble hallways of the Reich Chancellery, the faint sound of boots striking the polished floors, a constant reminder of the urgency of the war. Inside a high-stakes War Council meeting, the fate of the Third Reich is being determined in real time. As Adolf Hitler's ambitious vision of expanding German territory across Europe continues to unfold, a new, insidious reality emerges. Nazi Germany is entrenched in a war on multiple fronts, but now, a new, overwhelming enemy is taking shape not on the battlefield, but in factories across the Atlantic. General Wilhelm Keitel, head of the OKW, stands rigid at the front of the room. The walls, adorned with swastikas and military maps, seem to close in as he addresses the high-ranking officers. Gentlemen, the battle for Europe rages on, but the war we are fighting is no longer just against enemy soldiers. It is a war of resources, and we are losing, Keitel states, his voice laced with frustration. The officers exchange worried glances as the implications of his words sink in. The war has reached a critical point. Germany's industrial infrastructure, already strained by the demands of prolonged conflict, is under siege not just from Allied bombers, but from an economic and industrial juggernaut across the ocean. Reports indicate that the United States, despite having entered the war later than Germany, is rapidly transforming its vast industrial base into an unparalleled war machine. A map of Europe is unfurled on the table, its surface marked with key battlefronts, but another chart is soon placed next to it. This one charts the output of war materials: tanks, aircraft, ships, an unrelenting wave of production stretching from the factories of Detroit to the West Coast. The scale of U.S. industrial output is staggering. By 1942, the U.S. will produce more than 40,000 tanks, more than the total number of tanks in the German arsenal. American factories are churning out planes, tanks, and ammunition at a rate that Germany's bombed and overstretched industries cannot even dream of matching. Colonel General Alfred Jodel's voice cuts through the silence. The Americans are not only outproducing us, they are equipping their military forces at an unprecedented scale. How are we supposed to face this juggernaut? He asks, his words heavy with disbelief. General Erich von Manstein, the brilliant strategist, takes a step forward, his brow furrowed in thought. We face a dilemma unlike any we have known, he mutters. We've conquered Europe, but we cannot conquer factories. We cannot conquer an industrial output that dwarfs our own. The officers, usually so confident in their military prowess, now face a disheartening truth. While they have made advancements on the battlefield conquering vast swaths of Europe, their ability to continue the war hinges not just on military tactics, but on the strength of their economy and the resources they can produce. And here, the U.S. has a decisive, insurmountable advantage. Keitel's voice returns, quieter now, yet unmistakably grim. The war we are fighting cannot be won with tactics alone. We are now in a battle against the might of the American industrial complex, and that is a war we cannot afford to lose. The room falls silent, the weight of that statement heavy upon them. The truth is becoming undeniable. Germany, with all its military might and strategic genius, is facing an enemy whose industrial capabilities far surpass their own. The stakes of the war have escalated, and for the first time, the Nazi high command understands that they may not be able to win by force of arms alone. Continue, Keitel says, breaking the silence. We will address this problem head-on. But we must acknowledge this: our victory will not be determined by our soldiers alone. It will be determined by who can produce more. As the meeting adjourns, the officers leave the room, their faces heavy with the knowledge that the war has shifted from a battle of men to a war of machines. The United States' industrial might has entered the fray, and for Germany, that is a reality they can no longer ignore. June 1942. The German High Command gathers again, this time in the wake of a devastating defeat in North Africa. The German forces, once confident in their blitzkrieg tactics, now find themselves stretched thin, facing the harsh reality of a war on two fronts. As the Nazi leadership assembles around a large table in the Führerbunker, their faces are grim. The war has become a struggle not just for territory, but for survival itself. General Heinz Guderian, the architect of blitzkrieg, leans over a map of the Eastern Front, His finger traces the advancing Soviet lines, a stark reminder of the pressure Germany faces in the east. Our forces are buckling, Guderian states, his voice tinged with frustration. The Russians are pushing us back, and we've lost valuable ground. The situation in the south is equally dire. We have no reserves to push forward. His words cut through the air, underscoring the growing crisis. Colonel General Jodl interrupts, his face pale from exhaustion. It's not just the Soviets we're dealing with. Reports from the Western Front are equally troubling. The Americans are turning the tide in the Pacific, and now have the ability to concentrate their efforts against us in Europe. His voice falters as he reflects on the American industrial output. They're producing at a rate that we cannot match. We've become unable to keep up. The officers exchange uneasy glances. Jodl's words carry a weight that cannot be ignored. While German forces have relied on strategic brilliance and speed, it has become increasingly clear that the war is now defined by industrial capacity. The United States' ability to flood the world with weapons, vehicles, and supplies is beginning to cripple the German war effort. A report slides across the table to Kittel, and he reads it aloud. By the end of 1942, the Americans will have produced more tanks than we have in total. The realization hits with the force of a hammer blow. They are fighting not just the Allies' armies, but an unrelenting tide of industrial output that dwarfs their own. How is this possible? General von Manstein mutters under his breath. How can they produce so much, so fast? His tone is one of disbelief. The U.S. isn't just fighting a war. They are waging a war of attrition against us. But it's one they will win, says Keitel, his voice low. The sheer scale of their production is unprecedented. We can't keep up. The officers, once confident in their military superiority, now find themselves grappling with a new enemy, U.S. industrial output. The Germans have fought battles for years, relied on their advanced tactics and skilled soldiers, but they have been blindsided by the scale of the American war machine. The factories that churn out weapons, tanks, and planes faster than Germany can ever hope to produce are now the real force behind the Allied advance. Jodl's voice cuts through the murmur in the room. We've underestimated the power of their economy. The Americans can afford losses we can't even begin to imagine. They'll replace anything we destroy faster than we can keep up. Keitel, a man who has spent years strategizing the war effort, looks at his commanders with a steely gaze. The question is no longer how we can win the war through strategy and brilliance. The question is, can we even survive it? We are fighting an enemy that can sustain losses and keep fighting while we are on the edge of economic collapse. General Erwin Rommel, who had been silent throughout the meeting, speaks up for the first time. What you're saying is true, but the Americans won't stop until they've defeated us. We have to change our thinking. It's not just about winning battles anymore. It's about maintaining what we have left, ensuring that our soldiers are equipped to face an enemy that is better supplied, better prepared, and better equipped. I fear we are running out of time. The room goes silent as the full weight of the situation settles over them. They have always known that war is about more than just tactics, but now it is clear that their struggle will not be won with blitzkrieg alone. The U.S. has turned the war into an industrial contest, and Germany, caught in a web of its own strategic overreach and insufficient resources, is losing. The enemy's factories have become their greatest adversary, and the Nazi high command is realizing that, unless they adapt, they are doomed to lose this war. The officers exchange glances, each of them grappling with the same bitter truth. The U.S. economy has become an unstoppable force, and Germany's war effort built on aggression, speed, and surprise is running out of options. Continue, says Keitel, breaking the silence. We must find a way to turn this tide, or we may have already lost. The officers leave the room, each of them burdened by the realization that their victory is slipping further and further from reach. The war, it seems, is no longer about strategy. It is about survival. September 1943. The Eastern Front. The bitter chill of the Russian winter presses down on the battered German forces as they retreat from Stalingrad, their once proud armies now scrambling to hold ground against the relentless Soviet push. The harsh landscape is a mirror of their dwindling hope. Amid the ruins of the city and the desperate rush to reinforce the crumbling front lines, the German High Command convenes yet again. This time, however, it is not just a matter of military strategy, it is a question of how long Germany can even keep up the fight. In the depths of the Führerbunker, the War Council assembles. Keitel, his face weathered by the years of conflict, holds a report in his hands, the ink smudged by the sweat of anxiety. "We've lost over 500,000 men at Stalingrad," he says, his voice strained. "The Soviets are regrouping and advancing. We cannot continue to pour men and material into a hole like this." The weight of defeat hangs heavily in the room, each officer knowing the consequences of such losses. But it's not just the Soviets pushing forward. A report from the West is handed to Keitel. He scans it quickly, his expression darkening. "The Americans," he mutters, "they have invaded Italy and are preparing for an invasion in France. The Allies are moving faster than we can react." The words are like a hammer, smashing against the fragile wall of hope that had held up the Nazi war effort. General Guderian leans forward, rubbing his temples in frustration. "We cannot sustain these losses, not with the Americans flooding Europe with war materials faster than we can produce anything. Our tanks, our planes, our men, none of it is enough to stop them. We have outpaced ourselves." His words are bitter, and for the first time, even Guderian, the master of blitzkrieg, seems at a loss for solutions. A map of Europe is laid out in front of them, its edges frayed from overuse. The advancing Allied lines are creeping closer to Germany, and the once unified front is now shattered, spread too thin. The losses from bombings are staggering, and every factory that is repaired or relocated to the rear is a reminder of how vulnerable their supply chain has become. They've been fighting a war on two fronts, but now, with the Allied war machine moving in from both the West and the East, the German leadership begins to realize the truth. They cannot win a war of attrition against an industrial behemoth like the United States. "How can we continue fighting when our factories are still being destroyed by Allied bombers?" General von Manstein asks, his voice hollow. The question lingers in the air, unanswered, as the room grows heavy with the knowledge that Germany's industrial base is no match for the overwhelming force of U.S. production. Keitel speaks next, his voice cold and resigned. "The problem is that we don't just face the Allies on the battlefield, we face their industry. Their production is feeding their military, and we are running out of the ability to keep up. The reality is clear now. Germany cannot win this war if it cannot outproduce its enemy. For every tank destroyed on the battlefield, the Allies produce 5 more. For every plane shot down, another one replaces it within days." In a moment of desperation, Jodl voices a grim prediction. This war was never just about defeating the enemy's armies. It was about defeating their will to fight. But how can we break the spirit of the Americans when they have the means to sustain their efforts indefinitely? His words land heavily in the room. The German High Command, for the first time, faces the brutal reality that they are fighting an enemy whose resources and industrial capacity will never run dry. For a moment, there is silence. The officers look at each other, each of them trying to find some spark of hope, but all they see is the weight of overwhelming odds. Their once proud military machine is no longer enough to secure victory. The gap between their own industrial output and that of the United States is growing wider, and Germany's ability to win through superior tactics is slipping away with each passing day. "We must do something," Keitel says finally, breaking the silence. "We must find a way to strike at their economy, to slow their production. If we don't, we will have nothing left to fight with." The desperation in his voice is evident, but even as he speaks, the officers know that the reality is darker than they are willing to admit. The war, for all its tactical brilliance, has come down to one fact. They are losing the battle of production. And with each passing day, the gap between their own dwindling capacity and the endless tide of American war materials grows wider. Germany, once the industrial powerhouse of Europe, is now fighting against an enemy whose factories churn out more than Germany's entire war effort could hope to match. As the meeting draws to a close, the officers disperse, their faces clouded with the same bleak understanding. The war cannot be won on the battlefield alone. The question now is how long Germany can continue to fight with a shattered economy and an enemy whose strength lies not in soldiers, but in the factories that churn out their weapons of war. Keitel's final words echo as they leave the room. "We must prepare for the inevitable. But there is no escape from the reality we are facing: the collapse of our economy. The officers exit the Führerbunker, each of them carrying the heavy burden of knowing that Germany's survival depends not just on the outcome of battles, but on whether their factories can continue to function in the face of an enemy that has already surpassed them. The strain of survival has become their new war, and they are losing it. January 1944. Berlin, Germany. The winter is harsh, and the air in the Führerbunker is thick with anxiety. The once confident swagger of the German officers has been replaced by a deep, quiet desperation. They gather again, but this time, it is no longer a matter of winning battles. It is a matter of how much longer they can continue the fight. Germany's once formidable military is stretched thin, and the industrial power of the United States is becoming an ever more insurmountable foe. Keitel stands at the front of the room, a map of Europe spread out before him. The red markers indicating German positions are fewer now, and the blue markers for the Allies advance steadily across the continent. The Soviet Red Army is pushing westward, the Americans are inching closer from the west, and the skies above Germany are filled with Allied bombers. The factory floors in Germany are more often silent than not, as the effects of bombings and resource shortages take their toll. Listen, Keitel begins, his voice taut with the strain of the years. The reports from the factories are nothing short of catastrophic. Our fuel production is down by nearly 40%. Steel production is barely half of what we need. Every single tank we build is just a patch on a sinking ship. He turns to the officers seated around the table, his gaze scanning the room. The Americans are turning the tide, and we are too far behind to catch up. General von Manstein leans forward, the weariness in his eyes evident as he looks at the charts. Their tanks, their planes, their ships, all of it is outpacing our capabilities. The Americans are producing almost 300,000 vehicles a year, more than we've managed in the entire course of this war. How can we possibly keep up? His voice is barely a whisper, yet it rings with the weight of defeat. A report is passed to Jodl, who reads it with a furrowed brow. The Americans are now producing over 11,000 planes a month. 11,000. That's nearly double what we've been able to produce in the same period. And they're doing it month after month. I don't know how we can fight against that kind of capacity. It's not even a fair fight anymore. The officers look at each other, and the air in the room grows even heavier. The disparity between their industrial capabilities has become undeniable, and there's no longer any illusion that Germany can win this war through military superiority alone. The Allies, led by the relentless American production, have begun to create a war machine that Germany simply cannot match. We cannot keep up, says Jodl, his voice filled with a level of finality. They have the manpower, the resources, and the industrial might to replace any losses we inflict. The longer we drag this out, the more we risk becoming completely irrelevant. Our factories are unable to support this war, and the bombing campaigns are only going to make it worse. General Rommel, who had been silent throughout much of the meeting, now speaks with the grave tone of a man who has seen the enemy up close. It's not just about numbers. It's about sustainability. The Americans don't need to win every battle. They don't need to capture every city. They need to outlast us, and they will. Their ability to produce weapons faster than we can destroy them has put us in a position where we are simply treading water. Keitel's eyes narrow as he looks down at the reports, knowing that the grim truth is becoming impossible to ignore. We were never prepared for this, he says softly. We believed that our military might, our blitzkrieg tactics, would win the war. But we were wrong. The US has forced us into a battle of attrition we cannot win. The officers sit in stunned silence, each one realizing that the situation has passed beyond the point of repair. Germany has always prided itself on its military ingenuity and tactical brilliance, but now it finds itself facing an enemy whose industrial power has become its greatest weapon. How long before we cannot fight at all? Asks von Manstein, his voice barely above a whisper. The question lingers in the air, unanswered, but its implications are clear. Germany's capacity to wage war is faltering, and it is only a matter of time before the entire Nazi war effort collapses under the strain of industrial inadequacy. Keitel leans forward, his fingers pressing into the map as if trying to force the situation to change. We cannot afford to lose morale. We must continue to fight, but we must acknowledge this reality. We cannot win this war on the battlefield alone. We must adapt, or we will be destroyed. The officers look at each other, unsure of what adapting means in the face of such overwhelming odds. The war has become something they cannot control. They had hoped for a quick victory, for a world reshaped by military strength, but now they are simply trying to survive long enough to hold off the inevitable collapse. Continue, Keitel orders, breaking the silence. We must continue to fight, no matter how futile it seems. We have no other choice. The meeting adjourns, but the officers leave the room with the same heavy burden they have carried for so long. The war, once a battle of conquest, is now a race for survival, and with every passing day, it becomes clearer that Germany's industrial heart is beating its last. The Allies are not just defeating them on the battlefield, they are winning through the strength of their production. For Germany, the breaking point has arrived. They can no longer rely on their military might alone, and with every new American tank, plane, and ship, the future grows darker. The war they thought they could win has become a war they are simply trying to survive. The collapse of the Nazi economy is no longer a distant possibility, it is a present, unavoidable reality. April 1945, Berlin, Germany. The once proud capital of the Third Reich is now a shattered shell of its former self. The streets, once bustling with the energy of an empire on the rise, are now eerily quiet, save for the occasional rumble of distant artillery. The city is under siege, bombed relentlessly by Allied air forces, surrounded by Soviet troops to the east, and with the Western Front quickly collapsing under the weight of advancing American and British forces. The dream of Nazi supremacy is slipping away, and with it, the belief in victory. Inside the Führerbunker, the air is thick with tension, the hum of the war raging outside a constant reminder of the crumbling state of the regime. Keitel, Jodl, von Manstein, and the other senior commanders have gathered once again. The officers, once full of purpose and pride, now appear weary and defeated, their faces drawn with the toll the war has taken. The room, once a place for grand strategy, now serves as little more than a stage for the final moments of a lost cause. We are finished, Keitel says, his voice heavy with resignation as he stands before a large map of Europe. The Americans are advancing from the west, the Soviets from the east, and we are running out of everything. Our soldiers are exhausted, our factories are barely functioning, and our supply lines are completely severed. He pauses, looking around at the faces of his fellow officers. This war was never about winning battles anymore. It was about survival, and we've lost that too. General Guderian, once a symbol of the rapid, lightning-fast blitzkrieg tactics, slumps in his chair, the weight of defeat weighing heavily on him. We thought we could outlast them with superior tactics, but the Americans and the Soviets have proven that they can outproduce and outlast us at every turn. Our best tactics have been rendered useless by their industrial might. The report in front of Jodl shows the last of Germany's remaining reserves, an army on the brink of collapse, unable to hold even the most strategic of positions. We've lost our last offensive capacity. The Americans are not just fighting our armies, they're fighting our ability to keep up with their production. Even if we manage to hold this ground for a few more days, we won't be able to fight back. We're exhausted, we're starving, and we're out of weapons, Jodl states bluntly. For a long moment, no one speaks. The officers look at each other with weary eyes, the once unshakable belief in victory now replaced with the bitter realization that their efforts have been futile. The German war machine, once the most powerful in the world, has been ground to a halt not by the enemy's armies, but by their economy. The factories are finished, General Rommel speaks up, his voice raw with fatigue. The Americans and Soviets have made sure of that. We cannot rebuild, we cannot supply our troops, and we cannot fight on this front. The war is over. We lost it the moment we failed to keep up with their industrial output. It wasn't the enemy armies we could not defeat, it was the enemy factories. Keitel nods grimly. We've been outproduced, outlasted, and outmanned. The Americans don't need to win every battle. They've already won the war. Their industrial output is the true weapon of this conflict. They can replace any tank, any plane, any soldier we take down, and we can't do the same. There is no grand strategy now, no hope of victory, only survival. The Reich is on its last legs, and as the Allies close in, the officers are left with the harsh reality that their once mighty nation is crumbling. Germany is finished, Keitel says finally, his voice devoid of hope. we've come to the end of the road. The war is lost, not because we failed in battle, but because we failed to keep pace with our enemies. The Americans, and to a lesser extent, the Soviets, have proven that war is no longer just about armies. It's about factories. And we've lost the factory war. The officers exchange one last glance, a wordless acknowledgement of the truth they've known for months. The Third Reich's grand experiment, built on military might, expansion, and domination, has crumbled beneath the weight of industrial production. In the end, the war wasn't won by tanks, planes, or troops. It was won by factories, production lines, and an unyielding supply chain that no military strategy could match. As the war draws to its inevitable conclusion, the German High Command knows the fate of their nation has been sealed by something they could never have predicted: the sheer scale and power of the American economy. With the Allies closing in on Berlin, there is no longer any room for illusions. Germany's military is in ruins, its economy shattered. The dream of Nazi supremacy is no more, and the once mighty German war effort has crumbled, suffocated by the overwhelming industrial might of the United States. The final descent is now complete, the Third Reich is finished, and the world will never be the same. May 1945. Berlin, Germany. The streets of Berlin are in ruins. The once proud capital of the Third Reich now lies in the midst of a battlefield, where the crackle of machine gun fire and the thud of artillery bombardments echo through the wreckage. The Soviets advance relentlessly from the east, and the American and British forces approach from the west. The end is near for Nazi Germany, but it is not just the city or the military that is crumbling. What is collapsing now is the very myth of invincibility that the Nazi regime has built up over the past decade. Inside the Führer bunker, the final remnants of the German High Command convene one last time. There is little left to be said. The men who once believed in the strength of the Reich, who thought that superior tactics and vision could defeat the world, now sit in silence. They are surrounded by the walls of a bunker, closed off from the outside world, a reflection of their once immense power that has now become a tomb for their shattered ideals. General Keitel stands at the front of the room, his posture stooped and weary. He looks out at the officers, the faces that once radiated determination now filled with resignation. "We've failed," he says quietly, his voice devoid of the bravado it once held. "We did not lose because our men were weaker, our tanks slower, or our planes less capable. We lost because we could not keep up. We were defeated by what we could not see: the power of industrial production. The myth of our invincibility was just that, a myth. For the first time in the war, there is no argument, no rebuttal. The officers, men who had once believed in the superiority of German engineering, tactics, and military doctrine, now see the truth laid bare. The German Reich, despite its technological and tactical prowess, was never designed to outlast the sheer industrial capacity of the United States. General Rommel, his once vibrant face now aged by exhaustion, leans forward in his chair. "We built this myth around our soldiers, our leaders, and our ideology. But the real power, the real weapon of this war, was never in our hands. It was in the factories of the United States. We were never going to win a war of attrition against them. And yet, we chose to fight that war." The others nod, acknowledging the bitter truth. For all the successes of their military campaigns, for all the technological innovations they brought to the battlefield, they could not overcome the one thing they had underestimated: the industrial might of their enemies. Colonel General Jodl looks down at the maps scattered across the table. "I remember when we thought that victory was within our grasp. We imagined the Allies would fold under the weight of our military superiority, but we could not see that their power did not rest in any one tank, any one soldier. It was in their ability to replenish what we destroyed faster than we could strike. They fed their war machine from the depths of their factories, while we fed ours from the depths of our exhausted resources." He pauses, the reality of the situation settling over him. "We thought we could destroy their armies, but what we could not destroy was their production, and in the end, that's all that matters." General von Manstein, once one of Germany's most respected commanders, raises his eyes from the table, his expression dark with understanding. "We tried to outsmart them. We tried to win the war with superior tactics, with speed, with brilliance. But they had what we could never match: the ability to produce and sustain that brilliance. Their factories didn't tire. Their production didn't slow down. We were fighting ghosts of our own creation. Kittel's eyes meet those of his fellow officers, and for the first time in years, he sees the full extent of their defeat reflected in their eyes. We didn't lose because we weren't strong enough. We lost because we didn't recognize the nature of the war we were in. It wasn't about tactics. It wasn't about the battlefield. It was about the economy. And we were fighting a war of resources we could never win. The truth is inescapable. Nazi Germany, for all its might, had based its entire war strategy on the assumption that superior military doctrine and overwhelming force could overcome any obstacle. But it was never prepared for a war against a power that could produce weapons faster than they could destroy them. It was never prepared for an enemy that could replenish its armies with the flick of a switch, while Germany's factories and supply lines dwindled under the constant strain of bombing and resource shortages. Now, the myth of German invincibility is gone, shattered by the realization that industrial production is something they had never truly grasped, as the most important element of warfare was the true determinant of victory. "There is nothing left to do but survive," says Jodl quietly, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. And we know that even survival is not guaranteed. As the meeting draws to a close, the officers file out of the room one by one, their faces drawn with exhaustion. There is no grand strategy left, no hope of a miracle. The war is over, and Germany has lost not because of their soldiers, their tactics, or their technology, but because they were unable to keep up with the relentless, overwhelming power of the U.S. industrial machine. The myth of the invincible German Reich has collapsed, and with it, the Third Reich fades into history as one of the greatest examples of a nation undone not by its enemy's weapons, but by its own inability to adapt to the changing nature of war. The collapse of Germany's economy, its factories, and its war effort has marked the end of an era. The Allies have won, not through sheer force of arms, but through the unmatched might of their industrial superiority. And with that, the war is finally over. May 1945, Berlin, Germany. The collapse of Nazi Germany has become a foregone conclusion. The once vibrant heart of the Reich, Berlin, lies in ruins, its streets now echoing with the heavy footsteps of Allied soldiers. The city's monuments, symbols of an empire that sought to reshape Europe, have been reduced to rubble. Where Hitler once dreamed of a 1,000-year Reich, only silence remains. The war is over, but the scars it leaves will remain for generations to come. In the aftermath of Germany's surrender, the Allied forces divide the country. The Soviets take control of the eastern portion, while the Americans, British, and French administer the western zones. The city of Berlin itself is divided, each sector controlled by one of the four occupying powers. For the people of Germany, the world has changed overnight. The myth of Nazi invincibility is shattered, and a new, uncertain future awaits. The once powerful Reich has fallen, leaving a devastated nation to pick up the pieces. The cost of the war is immeasurable. Millions of lives have been lost, both in the military and among civilians. The Holocaust, the systematic extermination of 6 million Jews, along with millions of other victims, has left an indelible mark on the conscience of humanity. The streets of Europe are lined with the ghosts of the past, thousands of cities and towns reduced to ash, their inhabitants either displaced or dead. The legacy of Nazi aggression will forever be tied to the unimaginable suffering it caused. For Germany, the aftermath of the war is one of destruction and reckoning. The once proud nation, whose factories and resources were the backbone of its war effort, now faces complete economic ruin. The factories that once churned out tanks, planes, and weapons are now silent, their production lines dismantled by the Allies. Industrial capacity, which had been Germany's strength, has become its downfall as the war effort has exhausted the country's resources and infrastructure. The myth of a powerful, self-sustaining nation has crumbled. In the years following the war, Germany begins the long and painful process of rebuilding. The Marshall Plan, implemented by the United States, helps provide economic aid to the western sectors of Germany, spurring recovery. The economic miracle of the 1,950 seconds and 1,960 seconds, based on a foundation of American aid and new industrial technologies, gives rise to the Wirtschaftswunder, economic miracle. But the shadows of the past remain. For the German people, the war's legacy is one of guilt, shame, and loss. Many citizens are left grappling with the horrifying truths of what their nation had done during the war. The idea of collective responsibility for the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime becomes a subject of heated debate and reflection in the years to come. The concept of Vergangenheitsbewältigung, or coming to terms with the past, becomes central to post-war German identity. In the decades that follow, the country is forced to confront its actions, not only in terms of military aggression, but also the horrors of the Holocaust and the devastation it wrought across Europe. Yet, amidst the ruins, a new generation of Germans rises to rebuild. The war is over, but its legacy continues to shape the country. Over time, Germany works to re-enter the global community, its identity forever marked by the scars of the past. Its recovery is symbolic of the larger post-war world, a world that has learned from the lessons of industrialized warfare, one where the power of production, not just military prowess, will shape future conflicts. As the years pass, the legacy of the war is enshrined in memorials and museums, in books and films, in the collective memory of the world. The war and its overwhelming impact will never be forgotten. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, the perils of ideology taken to its extreme, and the lasting consequences of a war that was not simply fought on the battlefield but in the factories, the supply chains, and the economies of the nations involved. The defeat of Nazi Germany by the combined forces of the Allies, and particularly the industrial superiority of the United States, marks a turning point in the history of warfare. No longer would military might alone determine the outcome of global conflict. The war reveals that in the modern world, production capacity, economic sustainability, and industrial power would be the true determinants of victory. The United States, with its unparalleled industrial resources, had not just defeated Germany's army, it had outlasted Germany's economy and outproduced its war effort, ensuring that no amount of strategic brilliance could overcome its manufacturing might. The collapse of the Nazi regime was not merely a military defeat, it was an economic and industrial defeat that reshaped the world's understanding of power. The myth of Nazi invincibility, once preached by its leaders, was torn down not just by Allied forces on the ground, but by the crushing weight of an industrial war that no one power could hope to win alone. Germany's industrial hubris, its reliance on the belief that military genius could overcome all, had led to its undoing. The war ended, but the lessons it left behind would echo throughout history.